Please stop. I can only take 3 inches in because, the Japanese prisoner of war said to the black American soldier. I stood at the edge of the train platform, my white Red Cross uniform stark against the late autumn gray, watching as the Japanese prisoners filed out of the transport cars. Their faces were drawn and weary, eyes downcast, shoulders slumped under the weight of defeat. My heart ached at the sight, even though I knew these men had been our enemies just weeks ago. The first group shuffled past me, their threadbare uniforms hanging loose on thin frames. Among them, one young soldier caught my attention. He had sharp, intelligent eyes that darted around nervously, taking in everything: the towering guard towers, the endless rows of barbed wire, the armed soldiers watching their every move. I would later learn his name was Takeshi Ishida. "Ma'am, best stay back," Sergeant Miller warned me, his rifle held at the ready. But I stood my ground. These were patients. Now, not enemies. And my duty as a nurse superseded any lingering fear or prejudice. I noticed how Ishida's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his meager belongings. The other prisoners huddled close together, whispering in Japanese. Though I couldn't understand their words, their fear was plain to see. One elderly prisoner stumbled, and Ishida quickly steadied him, earning a sharp "keep moving" from one of the guards. The late October wind whipped across the platform, causing the prisoners to pull their thin jackets tighter. Wisconsin winters would be brutal for men accustomed to Pacific Islands. I made a mental note to requisition extra blankets from the supply office. As they marched toward the barracks, I overheard snippets of worried conversation from the American guards. "Watch them. Careful-like. These Japs fought like demons on Saipan," another responded. "Heard they'd rather die than surrender. Can't trust 'em." I followed the group at a distance as they were processed into the camp. Each man was assigned a number, photographed, and directed to their quarters. Ishida, now prisoner #247, stood rigidly as his picture was taken, his face a mask of stoic dignity. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting to the armed guards. Through the small infirmary window, I watched them settle into their barracks. The building was spare but solid, with rows of metal bunks and a pot-bellied stove in the center. Still, it must have seemed like a prison to them. Their whispered conversations grew more urgent as darkness fell, their faces illuminated by the harsh searchlights that swept across the compound. Ishida chose a bottom bunk near the wall. He sat there for a long while, staring at nothing, lost in thought. I wondered what memories haunted him, what horrors he'd seen on those blood-soaked Pacific Islands. Finally, he lay down, but I could tell from his rigid posture that sleep would not come easily. The night shift guards, they began their rounds, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel paths. Each time they passed the barracks, I saw several prisoners flinch at the sound. The tempo of their footsteps seemed to match the nervous energy that permeated the camp, steady, relentless, threatening. In the quiet moments between patrols, I could hear muffled sobs from some of the bunks. These proud soldiers, reduced to crying in the dark like lost children. It made my own eyes sting with tears, remembering my brother's letters about the loneliness of war before we lost him in France. The night stretched on, filled with the sound of boots, whispered fears, and the distant howl of wind across the Wisconsin plains. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. I stood at my station in the camp infirmary, organizing medical supplies, when I saw them through the window, the new group of Japanese prisoners being led to the laundry unit. Colonel Mason had informed me yesterday that they'd arrived late last night, and I'd been told to expect possible health checks later this week. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard as I watched Colonel Mason directing the prisoners with precise hand gestures. His posture was rigid, maintaining that professional distance he always kept. Even from here, I could see the uncertainty in the Japanese men's movements, the way they huddled together, eyes downcast, shoulders tense. My attention was drawn to one prisoner in particular. He was younger than most, with a slight frame that suggested recent weight loss. His movements were hesitant, almost painful. I made a mental note to check his file later. Sam Johnson appeared from the laundry building, clipboard in hand. I smiled, remembering our conversation from last night's dinner when he'd mentioned being assigned to supervise the new arrivals. If anyone could handle this delicate situation with grace, it was Sam. I moved, closer to the window, curious to see how things would unfold. The young prisoner I'd noticed earlier, I would later learn his name was Takeshi Ishida, was stationed near the sorting table. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the first bundle of sheets. Sam approached him with that calm demeanor I'd come to know so well. To my surprise, he spoke a few words in Japanese. My eyebrows rose. I hadn't known Sam spoke any Japanese. The prisoner's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Sam's voice carried across the yard, gentle but clear. Genki desu ka? How are you feeling? The prisoner, Ishida, stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The other prisoners nearby stopped their work too, staring at this unexpected exchange. Colonel Mason observed from a distance, his face unreadable but his posture relaxed. I watched as Sam demonstrated the proper sorting technique, his movements slow and deliberate. He spoke in that mixture of basic Japanese and English I'd heard him use with other prisoners. But there was something different about his interaction with Ishida. Maybe it was the way he noticed the young man's exhaustion, or how he positioned himself to block the harsh morning sun from Ishida's eyes. As the day wore on, I tended to my duties but kept glancing out whenever I could. The scene in the laundry yard remained calm, with Sam maintaining his steady presence. Near shift's end, I watched him approach Ishida again, this time holding something in his hand. From my vantage point, I recognized it as one of the extra ration packs we sometimes gave to undernourished prisoners. The look on Ishida's face when Sam offered him the food, I'll never forget it. Pure bewilderment, as if someone had just turned his world upside down. He stared at the ration pack like it might disappear, then at Sam's face, then back at the food. His hands shook as he accepted it, and I could see the internal struggle playing across his features. Sam simply nodded, said something, quiet I couldn't hear, and moved on to his next task. But Ishida remained rooted to the spot, clutching that small package of food like it was the most precious thing in the world. In that moment, I saw something shift in his expression. Anhedi, a crack in whatever wall he'd built around himself. I hurried through my rounds that morning, checking on the usual cases. A sprained ankle from the exercise yard, a case of mild pneumonia, and some dental work that needed attention. The infirmary was quieter than usual, which always made me nervous. In my experience as a nurse, quiet mornings often preceded busy afternoons. Sure enough, just as I was updating my charts, Sam Johnson burst through the infirmary doors, supporting a thin Japanese prisoner who looked barely conscious. "Nurse Harper," Sam called out, his voice steady but urgent. "We need help here." I rushed over as Sam helped the prisoner into a nearby chair. The young man's face was ashen, his uniform hanging loose on his frame. I recognized him as one of the new arrivals, Takeshi Ishida, according to the tag on his shirt. "What happened?" I asked, already checking his pulse. It was rapid and thready under my fingers. "Found him in the mess hall," Sam explained, keeping one steadying hand on Ishida's shoulder. "He was trying to eat, then just collapsed. Been having trouble keeping food down, I think." I nodded, noting how Ishida's throat worked convulsively. After months of near starvation, many prisoner of war struggled with proper eating. Their bodies sometimes rejected the sudden introduction of regular meals. "Get me some water," I instructed Sam, who quickly filled a cup from the nearby dispenser. I took it and held it to Ishida's lips. "Small sips," I said gently, though I wasn't sure he understood English. Ishida's eyes were wide with panic as he tried to drink. Suddenly, he pushed the cup away, gasping. "Please stop," he cried out in broken English. "I can only take 3 inches in because..." His voice trailed off as he gestured frantically at his throat. My heart ached at his distress. I'd seen this before, the throat muscles tightening from anxiety and physical weakness, making even swallowing water a painful challenge. "It's okay," Sam said softly, surprising me by speaking a few words in basic Japanese. He mimed, taking tiny sips, demonstrating with his own hand. Slowly, very slow. I watched as Sam's calm presence seemed to help Ishida relax slightly. The prisoner's breathing steadied, and when I offered the water again, he managed a few small sips. "That's it," I encouraged, sharing a grateful look with Sam. Just a little at a time. As I examined Ishida more thoroughly, I could see the physical toll of his journey etched in his face, but there was something else there too. Confusion, perhaps even shame, as he looked between Sam and me. I recognized that expression. I'd seen it before in other prisoners who couldn't reconcile their expected treatment with the care they actually received. After making sure Ishida was stable, I prepared a bed for him in the infirmary. He needs rest and careful monitoring, I told Sam. I'll keep him here tonight. Sam nodded, saying something gentle in Japanese to Ishida before helping him to the bed. As I watched them, I couldn't help but notice how Ishida's eyes followed Sam's movements, filled with a mixture of wariness and growing wonder. It was a look I'd come to recognize, the first crack in the wall of hatred and fear these men had been taught to maintain. I tucked the blanket around Ishida's thin frame, noting how he trembled slightly at my touch. He was still so afraid, so uncertain, but at least for now, he was safe. I stood at my usual post in the infirmary, sorting through medical supplies when they brought in the Japanese prisoner who'd collapsed yesterday. His name was Ishida, according to the chart. His eyes darted nervously around the room as 2 guards escorted him in for his follow-up examination. "Good morning," I said softly, trying to put him at ease. "I'm Nurse Harper. Let's check how you're doing today." Through the thin walls, I could hear other prisoner of wars talking in hushed Japanese as they passed by. Ishida's shoulders tensed at their voices. I noticed how he kept his gaze down, almost as if he was ashamed to be here. I took his vital signs, noting them in his chart. His pulse was racing, but otherwise, he seemed stable. "The dehydration from yesterday is improving," I explained, even though I wasn't sure how much English he understood. "But you need to keep drinking water regularly." Through the window, I watched Sergeant Johnson walking across the yard. He glanced toward the infirmary, and I gave him a small wave. He'd been the one who'd brought Ishida in yesterday, showing such gentle concern that it had touched my heart. Over the next few days, I observed Ishida during my rounds. He was always in the laundry area where Sergeant Johnson supervised. The sergeant would demonstrate folding techniques with patience, speaking in simple English mixed with basic Japanese phrases. What struck me most was how Ishida's demeanor changed around Johnson. Less rigid, almost receptive. But there was something else I noticed too. Whenever other Japanese prisoners passed by, Ishida would stiffen up, his face becoming an expressionless mask. The internal struggle was written all over him, even if he tried to hide it. One afternoon, while I was restocking supplies near the laundry building, I overheard Johnson teaching Ishida how to use the washing machine properly. "Like this," Johnson was saying, showing the proper way to load the clothes, not too much at once. Ishida nodded, his movements careful and precise. There was a moment when Johnson praised his work, and I caught the ghost of a smile on Ishida's face, before it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. That's when I noticed Lieutenant Yamamoto approaching. He was one of the highest-ranking Japanese officers in the camp, and his presence always seemed to cast a shadow. I pretended to be absorbed in my inventory as he stopped near Ishida. Yamamoto spoke in rapid Japanese, his tone sharp and cutting. Though I couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear from his gestures toward Johnson, and the way Ishida's posture became rigid as stone. The young prisoner kept his eyes fixed on the ground, saying nothing as Yamamoto continued his apparent lecture. I felt my heart ache for Ishida. The conflict was evident in every line of his body, caught between the kindness being shown to him and what seemed to be intense pressure from his fellow prisoners. As Yamamoto finally walked away, Ishida remained frozen in place, his hands gripping a pile of clean sheets so tightly his knuckles had gone white. I wanted to say something, to offer some comfort, but I knew it wasn't my place. This was a battle Ishida would have to fight within himself. All I could do was continue my duties and hope that the small acts of kindness he was experiencing would eventually outweigh the weight of expectations being placed upon him by his fellow prisoners. I adjust my cap as I make my rounds through Camp McCoy's facilities. The morning sun casts long shadows across the compound, and I can't help but notice the solitary figure in the latrine building. It's the Japanese prisoner I treated last week, Ishida, on his hands and knees, scrubbing the concrete floor. Through the doorway, I watch him work methodically, his movements precise despite the obvious strain on his thin frame. His face is drawn, and I can tell he's lost more weight since I last checked his vitals. As the camp nurse, I've seen my share of suffering, but something about his quiet dignity touches my heart. "Good morning," I say softly, not wanting to startle him. He looks up briefly, giving a slight nod before returning to his task. I've learned that some prisoner of wars respond better to space than immediate attention. From my position near the doorway, I notice Sam Johnson approaching with his usual measured stride. He carries 2 canteens and what looks like extra bread wrapped in a cloth. Our eyes meet, and we share a knowing look. We've both been concerned about Ishida's isolation. Nurse Harper. Sam greets me with a respectful nod. Here to check on our friend? Just making my rounds, I reply, though we both know I linger here longer than necessary. His recovery's been slower than I'd like. I observe as Sam kneels near Ishida, offering him one of the canteens. Take a break, son, he says in that gentle way of his. At first, Ishida hesitates, his knuckles white around the scrub brush, but slowly, he sits back on his heels and accepts the water. While they share this moment, I notice the trembling in Ishida's hands, the dark circles under his eyes. As a nurse, I recognize the signs of both physical exhaustion and emotional trauma. But there's something else. When Sam speaks to him, Ishida's eyes show a flicker of trust, struggling against ingrained suspicion. I pretend to check supplies in the nearby cabinet while Sam settles beside Ishida on an overturned bucket. Got family back home? Sam asks, his voice casual but kind. The question hangs in the air for a long moment. I hold my breath, wondering if it's too personal, too soon. But then Ishida speaks, his voice rough from disuse. Mother, father, he says haltingly. Sister. His English is broken but clear enough. Mine are in Mississippi, Sam responds, breaking off a piece of bread and offering it to Ishida. Got 4 sisters myself. Youngest one's about your age, I'd guess. I watch as something shifts in Ishida's expression, a crack in the careful mask he usually wears. His shoulders drop slightly, and he takes the bread with trembling fingers. Your sister. He starts, then pauses, searching for words. She. Write to you? Every week, Sam smiles, pulling out a worn envelope from his shirt pocket. Want to see her picture? As Ishida tentatively reaches for the photograph, I notice tears gathering in his eyes. He blinks them away quickly, but not before I see them. In that moment, he's not a prisoner or an enemy soldier. He's just a young man far from home, connecting with another human being over something as simple as family love. I quietly step away, leaving them to their conversation. Some moments of healing don't need a nurse's presence. Sometimes, they just need the space to unfold on their own. I was making my evening rounds through the camp when I noticed the commotion near the laundry building. 2 Japanese prisoners were having what looked like a heated argument. I recognized one as Takeshi Ishida, the young soldier who'd collapsed from dehydration last week. The other was Lieutenant Yamamoto, an imposing figure who carried himself with unmistakable authority. You disgrace us all, Yamamoto was saying in Japanese, though I couldn't understand most of their words. His tone needed no translation. His face was twisted with contempt as he jabbed a finger at Ishida's chest. I lingered by the doorway, pretending to check my medical supplies while keeping an eye on the situation. As a nurse, I'd learned to spot trouble before it erupted. Ishida's shoulders were tense, but he kept his voice low and steady as he responded. Through the bits of Japanese I'd picked up, I caught phrases like kindness and humanity. Ishida gestured toward the direction of the American quarters, probably referring to Sergeant Johnson. I'd seen them working together, noticed how Sam treated the young prisoner with dignity. Yamamoto's response was sharp and cutting. He spat on the ground between them. Other prisoners nearby watched with a mix of fear and curiosity. Some nodded in agreement with Yamamoto, while others looked away, perhaps sharing Ishida's conflicted feelings. As the day wore on, I observed the ripple effects of that confrontation. During the afternoon meal, Ishida sat alone. A few prisoners would glance his way, then quickly look down at their bowls when others noticed. The isolation was palpable, hanging over him like a heavy cloud. Later, while treating a prisoner's infected cut, I overheard whispered conversations. Some spoke of Sergeant Johnson with grudging respect, mentioning extra rations or kind words. Others muttered about weakness and betrayal. The camp felt like a pot slowly coming to boil. That evening, as I organized supplies in the infirmary, I saw Ishida and Sergeant Johnson through the window. They were sitting on a bench near the laundry building, just far enough away that I couldn't hear their words. But I could see Ishida's face clearly in the fading light. He was speaking more than I'd ever seen him do before, his hands moving as he tried to explain something complex. Sam just listened, his face showing that quiet understanding I'd come to know well. He didn't interrupt or try to offer solutions. He simply gave Ishida the space to speak his truth. I watched Ishida's shoulders gradually relax as he talked. The weight he'd been carrying seemed to lift slightly. Sam nodded occasionally, his presence steady and reassuring. When Ishida finally fell silent, Sam placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. The sun was setting behind the barracks, casting long shadows across the camp. In that moment, I saw something I never expected to witness in a prisoner of war camp. Two men from opposite sides of a brutal war, finding common ground in their shared humanity. I rushed through the camp infirmary's door, my white uniform already damp with sweat from the humid Wisconsin summer. The Japanese prisoner, Lieutenant Yamamoto, lay on the cot before me, his usually stern face now twisted in pain. His fellow prisoner of wars had carried him in moments ago, their faces etched with worry. "How long has he been like this?" I asked Sergeant Johnson, who stood nearby, his usually calm demeanor tight with concern. "They said he's been complaining of stomach pain since yesterday," Sam replied, translating what one of the prisoners had told him. "But you know how they are, refusing to ask for help until it's almost too late." I pressed my hand against Yamamoto's forehead. The heat radiating from his skin alarmed me. "He's burning up. This could be appendicitis." I called out to Private Jenkins, our orderly. "Get Dr. Matthews immediately." But Dr. Matthews was away at the main base hospital, and his replacement wouldn't arrive for hours. The minutes ticked by, and I could only provide basic care, cool compresses, monitoring his vitals. The crowd of Japanese prisoners outside the infirmary grew larger, their whispers becoming more agitated. Through the window, I watched as Takeshi Ishida tried to calm his fellow prisoners, but their patience was wearing thin. One of them shouted something in Japanese, his voice sharp with anger. Others joined in, their voices rising in a crescendo of fury. "Sam," I said, my heart racing, "this isn't good." Before he could respond, the situation exploded. The prisoner of wars surged forward, pushing against the guards stationed outside. I heard shouts, the sound of scuffling feet, the sharp commands of the American guards. "Get back! Stand down!" The guards' voices carried through the thin walls. Then came the sound that would haunt me forever, a single gunshot cracking through the air. Everything seemed to move in slow motion after that. Through the window, I saw a Japanese prisoner crumple to the ground. Blood spread across his shirt like spilled ink. Sergeant Johnson rushed outside, his voice booming above the chaos, trying to restore order. I wanted to run out and help the fallen man, but I couldn't leave Yamamoto. My training warred with my instincts as I watched the scene unfold through the window. The other prisoners backed away, their faces masks of shock and grief. Ishida stood frozen, staring at his fallen comrade, his expression a mixture of horror and despair. The camp guards moved in, restoring order with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, the prisoners were escorted back to their barracks, leaving behind an awful silence broken only by the moans of my patient. Later that evening, as I changed Yamamoto's dressings, I caught Ishida watching from the doorway. His eyes held a weight I'd never seen before, not just sorrow, but something deeper, more profound. He looked at Yamamoto, then at me, then at the bloodstain still visible on the ground outside. I saw something change in him at that moment. The way he stood, the look in his eyes. It was as if he was seeing everything differently, not as a Japanese soldier, not as a prisoner, but as a human being witnessing the senseless tragedy of war. Without a word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders heavy with the burden of what he'd witnessed. In the quiet of the infirmary, I heard the distant sound of the guards changing shifts, the metallic clang of the camp gates, and felt the weight of all our failures to prevent this day's tragedy. I walked through the silent corridors of the camp infirmary, my footsteps echoing against the wooden floors. The aftermath of yesterday's protest weighs heavily on everyone. Through the window, I can see the prisoners in their barracks, heads bowed, moving like ghosts through their daily routines. The death of one of their own has cast a dark shadow over Camp McCoy. My attention is drawn to Takeshi Ishida, sitting alone on a bench near the laundry building. I've treated him before, a quiet soul with gentle eyes that seem to carry the weight of the world. Sam mentioned him to me several times, noting his struggle to find his place here. Today, he looks more lost than ever. I adjust my white uniform and make my way outside, medical bag in hand. The Wisconsin summer heat beats down mercilessly, but Ishida doesn't seem to notice. His shoulders are slumped, his usually meticulous appearance disheveled. As I approach, I notice his hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Ishida," I say softly in my limited Japanese, "are you feeling unwell?" He looks up, startled by my presence. His eyes are red-rimmed, though I can't tell if it's from lack of sleep or tears. Before he can respond, I spot Sam approaching from the direction of the guard station. There's a weariness in his step that I recognize, the same weariness I've seen in soldiers who've witnessed too much. "Nurse Harper." Sam nods to me, then turns to Ishida. "How you holding up, son?" I watch as Ishida struggles to form words. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. "I should have, could have." He trails off, his English failing him in his distress. Sam sits down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. I take out my stethoscope, more as a pretense to stay and observe than out of medical necessity. The connection between these two men, one a Black American sergeant, the other a Japanese prisoner, strikes me as remarkable. "You did the best you could," Sam says firmly. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." I notice Ishida's hands have stopped trembling. He looks at Sam, really looks at him, as if seeing something new in the sergeant's weathered face. The others. Ishida gestures vaguely toward the barracks. "They say I am." He searches for the word. "Traitor." "No," Sam shakes his head. "You're just a man trying to survive with his humanity intact. Ain't nothing wrong with that." I busy myself taking Ishida's pulse, though it's steady now. What I'm really monitoring is the change coming over him, the slight straightening of his spine, the clearing of his eyes. Later, as I'm organizing supplies in the infirmary, I see Ishida through the window again. He's sitting at one of the wooden tables near the barracks, paper and pencil in hand. His movements are deliberate as he writes, stopping occasionally to think. Sam told me he hasn't written home since arriving at Camp McCoy. I watch him fold the letter carefully, his fingers smoothing each crease with precision. There's something hopeful in the gesture, something that speaks of tomorrow rather than yesterday. In all my time nursing wounded soldiers, I've learned that healing isn't just about mending bodies. Sometimes it's about mending spirits, too. Through the infirmary window, I watched another beautiful Wisconsin sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. It had been weeks since the tragic protest, and the camp's rhythms were slowly returning to normal. As the head nurse at Camp McCoy, I'd seen my share of both cruelty and kindness, but what I witnessed between Sergeant Johnson and the Japanese prisoner Takeshi Ishida gave me hope. From my station near the medicine cabinet, I could see them working together in the yard. Ishida was helping Sam organize supply crates, their movements, synchronized as if they'd been working together for years. It wasn't my place to eavesdrop, but sometimes their conversations drifted through the open window. "My mama used to say," Sam's deep voice carried clearly, "that the good Lord gives us trials to teach us something." He paused to wipe his brow. "Growing up in Mississippi, I learned early that hatred is taught, not born." I pretended to sort bandages while watching Ishida's reaction. His English had improved considerably over the weeks, and I could see him processing Sam's words carefully. "In Japan," Ishida replied slowly, "we were taught Americans were demons. But you—" He struggled to find the right words. "You show kindness when you could show hate." Their conversations had grown deeper lately. Sam would often share stories about his childhood, about picking cotton under the hot southern sun, about his mama's prayers and his daddy's quiet strength. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of Ishida's face during these talks, too meloned, the way his eyes would soften, how his usual rigid posture would relax. One afternoon, while I was treating Ishida's blistered hands from his work detail, he surprised me by speaking about his own family. "My father is Shinto priest," he said quietly. "He taught me about honor, about duty. But now—" His voice trailed off, and I saw confusion cloud his features. Sam, who was nearby delivering fresh linens, sat down beside him. "Sometimes what we're taught and what we learn for ourselves don't match up," he said gently. "That's when we have to listen to our hearts." I watched as Ishida's shoulders tensed, then slowly relaxed. "In battle," he whispered, "I did terrible things. I believed it was right." His hands trembled slightly as I finished bandaging them. "But here, you treat us with respect. Even after everything." Sam pulled out his worn Bible from his back pocket. I'd seen him read it during his breaks. "My faith teaches me that every person is made in God's image," he explained. "Even when the world tells me different, I hold on to that truth." The way Ishida looked at that Bible, you'd think it held all the answers to the universe. And maybe, in some ways, it did. Not because of the book itself, but because of the man holding it and the genuine love for humanity he demonstrated daily. Later that evening, As I finished my rounds, I saw Ishida sitting alone on a bench outside the barracks. His face showed the deep contemplation of someone whose world was slowly shifting, piece by piece. The rigid soldier I'd first treated months ago was transforming into someone who dared to question, to feel, to hope. The sun had completely set now, leaving behind a purple twilight. In the growing darkness, I could see the outline of Ishida's shoulders, no longer bearing the weight of unquestioning certainty, but perhaps carrying something more valuable, the burden of truth and the courage to face it. Through the infirmary window, I watched the morning unfold with a peculiar energy in the air. The news of victory in Europe had reached Camp McCoy, and even the stillness felt different today. American flags snapped more proudly in the Wisconsin wind, and the guards walked with lighter steps. I was organizing medical supplies when I noticed Takeshi Ishida sitting alone on a bench outside the barracks, his thin frame hunched against the morning chill. Over the past weeks, I'd treated him for minor ailments, and something about his quiet dignity had touched my heart. He reminded me of my brother Thomas, the same thoughtful eyes, the same careful way of holding himself. Through the window, I observed Sergeant Johnson approaching Ishida. The two had formed an unlikely friendship that drew curious glances from both guards and prisoners. Johnson carried what looked like a newspaper, probably containing news about VE Day. I stepped outside, medical clipboard in hand, pretending to check inventory while staying within earshot. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. "Big news from Europe," Johnson was saying, his voice gentle. "War's over there." Ishida nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line. I'd learned to read his expressions during his visits to the infirmary, the slight tightening around his eyes that betrayed inner turmoil. Through the chain-link fence, I could see other Japanese prisoners gathered in small groups, their conversations more animated than usual. Some looked hopeful, others worried. The news from Europe had stirred something in all of them, a reminder that wars could end, that peace was possible. Later that afternoon, while checking on a prisoner with a sprained ankle, I overheard snippets of conversation about intercepted radio broadcasts. The prisoners spoke in hushed Japanese, but their tone carried both excitement and anxiety. One word I recognized clearly: Tokyo. When mail call came, I watched Ishida receive a letter. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, and I noticed how carefully he handled the paper, as if it might crumble like autumn leaves. Standing in the infirmary doorway, I saw his eyes move across the pages several times, drinking in every word from home. The setting sun painted the camp in soft orange hues as Ishida sat on his usual bench, still holding the letter. His face showed a complex mixture of emotions: love, worry, hope, and guilt, all wrestling beneath his composed exterior. I understood those feelings well. They mirrored my own when I'd received the letter about Thomas. Through my evening rounds, I kept glancing at Ishida's solitary figure. The letter had clearly affected him deeply. In the distance, someone was playing a harmonica, a melancholic tune that floated through the cooling air. Other prisoners were returning to their barracks, but Ishida remained, the letter now carefully folded and held close to his chest. The camp's lights began to flicker on, casting long shadows across the yard. As I prepared to end my shift, I saw Johnson approach Ishida one last time. No words were exchanged, just a gentle pat on the shoulder before the sergeant continued his rounds. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest comfort comes not from what we say, but from simply being present in someone's moment of deep feeling. I watched the camp from my infirmary window as news of Japan's surrender spreads like wildfire. After 2 years of tending to wounds, both visible and hidden, I can feel the shift in the air. The usual morning quiet has been replaced by an odd mixture of celebration and tension. Through the window, I observe small groups of prisoner of wars huddled together, their faces a complex tapestry of emotions. Some appear relieved, others worried. A few American guards are passing around cigarettes, their faces bright with victory smiles, but I notice they're keeping a careful distance from the Japanese prisoners. My attention is drawn to Takeshi Ishida, sitting alone on a wooden crate near the laundry building. I've treated him several times over the past months, first for dehydration, then for minor injuries. Each time, I noticed how different he seemed from the other prisoners. There was a softness in his eyes that grew stronger with each visit. Sam Johnson appears from around the corner, walking with his characteristic steady gait. I've grown to appreciate Sam's quiet strength during our many conversations about faith and duty. He approaches Ishida with careful steps, and I can see the Japanese man's shoulders relax as he recognizes who it is. Through the partially open window, their voices drift up to me. "It's really over," Ishida says in his improving English. His voice carries a mix of relief and something else, perhaps regret? "Yes, it is," Sam responds, settling down next to him on another crate. "How are you holding up?" I busy myself with organizing medical supplies, but I can't help overhearing their conversation. It's fascinating how their relationship has evolved from that first day when Ishida collapsed in the laundry room. I remember rushing to help, only to find Sam already there, supporting the frightened prisoner with gentle hands. "Many men are afraid," Ishida confides. "They think Americans will hurt us now that war is won." "That won't happen," Sam assures him. "Not here, not under my watch." I smile to myself, knowing Sam means every word. I've watched him stand up to other guards who showed less kindness, always maintaining his dignity despite the prejudice he himself faces. "When I first came here," Ishida says, his voice growing stronger, "I thought Americans were demons. Now," he pauses, searching for words, "now I understand we are all just men." "We've all changed," Sam replies. "War makes us see enemies everywhere. Peace lets us see people." I lean against the window frame, touched by their exchange. As a nurse, I've seen the worst of war's damage. Not just the physical wounds, but the devastating toll it takes on the human spirit. Yet here, in this unlikely friendship between a Black American sergeant and a Japanese prisoner, I see hope blooming like a flower through concrete. The camp around them continues its strange dance of celebration and caution, but these two men seem to exist in their own pocket of peace. Ishida's posture has changed completely from when he first arrived. Gone is the rigid military bearing, replaced by something more human, more real. I turn away from the window, giving them privacy for their moment of shared understanding. There's work to be done in the infirmary, but I carry their words with me. In all my time here at Camp McCoy, I've never seen a clearer example of how compassion can bridge even the widest of divides. I watch from the infirmary window as another day unfolds at Camp McCoy. The August heat hangs heavy, making everyone more irritable than usual. Since the news of VJ Day, there's been a strange tension in the air. Like a rubber band stretched too tight, ready to snap. "Nurse Harper," one of the guards calls out. "We need you in the yard." I grab my medical bag and hurry outside. A crowd has gathered near the laundry building, and I can hear raised voices before I even get there. Some of the Japanese prisoners are shouting in their native tongue, while others stand back, looking worried. "When will we go home?" One prisoner demands in broken English. "You lie to us." Through the crowd, I spot Takeshi Ishida standing quietly to the side. His face shows concern, but there's something else there too. A calmness I've come to recognize over the months I've treated him. Sergeant Johnson appears beside him, his presence steady as always. "Everyone needs to calm down," Sam says, his voice firm but gentle. "We understand your frustration." I position myself near the edge of the group, ready to step in if needed. The air feels electric with emotion. One of the older prisoners, a man I recognize from, treating his arthritis, spits at Sam's feet. My heart clenches, but Sam doesn't flinch. Then Ishida does something unexpected. He steps forward, placing himself between the angry prisoners and Sam. "Please," he says in Japanese, then switches to English, so everyone can understand. "They have treated us with honor. This is not the way." The crowd grows quiet. I've never heard Ishida speak so firmly before. His words carry weight with the other prisoners. They know his story, how he was one of the most suspicious when they first arrived. "We are alive," Ishida continues. "We are fed. Our wounds are treated." He glances my way, and I give him an encouraging nod. The Americans keep their word. They follow Geneva Convention. This is more than many armies do. Sam moves to stand beside Ishida. "Your paperwork is being processed," he explains. "It takes time to arrange safe transport for so many men. But you will go home." I watch as the tension slowly bleeds out of the crowd. The older prisoner who spat earlier drops his head, perhaps in shame. Others begin to disperse, their anger diffused by Ishida's quiet wisdom. As the yard empties, I approach Ishida and Sam. "That was brave," I tell Ishida, checking him over with a medical eye. These confrontations sometimes trigger his old symptoms. The rapid breathing, the shaking hands. But today, he seems steady. There's a quiet dignity in his bearing that wasn't there when he first arrived at Camp McCoy. Sam places a hand on Ishida's shoulder, and the Japanese soldier doesn't pull away. "Thank you," Sam says simply. Ishida shakes his head. "No, thank you. Both of you." He looks between Sam and me. "You showed me different way. Better way." I watch as other prisoners approach Ishida, speaking to him softly in Japanese. He's become something of a bridge between our two worlds, and seeing it fills me with hope. Even here, in this place of barbed wire and guard towers, something beautiful has grown. I stood at the infirmary window, watching the bustling activity in the camp yard. After months of tending to these men, seeing them through illness, injury, and despair, it felt surreal to know they'd soon be heading home. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds as prisoners lined up for their final breakfast at Camp McCoy. My eyes found Takeshi Ishida among them. He'd been one of my first patients, dehydrated, malnourished, and terrified when he arrived. Now he stood tall, helping some of the elderly prisoners navigate the breakfast line. The transformation in him was remarkable. Quite a change, isn't it? Sergeant Johnson appeared beside me, his familiar presence bringing a smile to my face. We'd spent countless hours together in this infirmary, tending to the sick and injured. "I was just thinking the same thing," I replied, adjusting my Red Cross cap. "Remember how he could barely keep water down when he first arrived?" Sam nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Now look at him. He's helping others, speaking English, even smiling sometimes." Through the window, I watched Ishida assist an older prisoner with his tray. The scene brought tears to my eyes. After losing my brother in Europe, I'd struggled to see the humanity in our enemies. But working here, watching men like Ishida transform through simple acts of kindness, had changed something in me too. The camp was a flurry of activity, as staff began dismantling unnecessary equipment. I organized medical supplies while keeping an eye on the yard through the window. Ishida and Sam found a quiet corner near the laundry building, the place where their unlikely friendship had first formed. They sat together on a wooden bench, talking softly. Even from a distance, I could see the emotion on both their faces. Sam pulled something from his pocket. It looked like paper and a pencil. Ishida accepted them with a deep bow, then settled down to write what I assumed was a letter. I busied myself with inventory, giving them their privacy, but I couldn't help glancing over occasionally. Ishida wrote steadily, pausing sometimes to think or to exchange words with Sam. His face showed such concentration, such purpose. This wasn't the same frightened man who'd collapsed in my infirmary months ago, begging us to stop forcing food on him because his throat could only take 3 inches in. Looking at them now, a Black American sergeant and a Japanese prisoner of war, sitting together as friends, I felt a profound sense of hope. If these two men could find common ground despite everything that should have divided them, maybe there was hope for all of us. The morning wore on as I continued my tasks. More boxes were packed, more equipment cataloged. Through it all, Ishida remained at his bench, writing carefully, occasionally showing something to Sam who would nod encouragingly. Whatever he was writing to his family, I knew it would be different from the terse, guarded letters he'd written when he first arrived. I watched him fold the paper carefully when he finished, handling it like something precious. Sam produced an envelope from his pocket, and Ishida slipped the letter inside. They sat there for a moment longer, these two men who'd found humanity in the midst of war, sharing one last quiet moment before their paths would diverge. From my station at the camp infirmary, I watched the line of Japanese prisoners walking toward the transport vehicles. The morning sun cast long shadows across the compound, and a cool autumn breeze carried the scent of pine from the surrounding Wisconsin forests. After months of tending to these men's wounds, both physical and emotional, seeing them leave stirred something deep within my heart. Takeshi Ishida stood out among the prisoners, his posture different from when he first arrived. Gone was the haunted, defensive stance. Instead, he walked with quiet dignity, his shoulders straight but relaxed. The transformation in him was remarkable, something I'd witnessed gradually through my interactions with him during his visits to the infirmary. "They're really leaving," I said softly to Sam Johnson, who stood beside me. We'd both come to see them off, though technically I wasn't required to be there. "Yes, ma'am," Sam replied, his voice carrying that same gentle strength I'd come to know so well. "Ishida's changed more than any of them." I nodded, remembering the day Ishida had first come to the infirmary, dehydrated and terrified. Remember how scared he was to take medicine from me? A small smile crossed my face at the memory. He thought we might poison him. The prisoners filed onto the waiting trucks, their meager possessions clutched in standard-issue bags. Ishida paused before climbing aboard, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Sam. The two men exchanged a long look, one that spoke volumes about their unlikely friendship. I felt my throat tighten as Ishida raised his hand in farewell. Sam returned the gesture, and I saw the emotion in both their faces. These were no longer enemy and captor, but two human beings who'd found common ground in the most unexpected place. The trucks rumbled to life, their engines breaking the morning quiet. As they began to move, I noticed Ishida watching the camp through the back of the truck. His expression was thoughtful, almost peaceful. It struck me then how different this departure was from other prisoner-of-war transfers I'd witnessed. There was no hatred in his eyes, no bitter resentment, just quiet acceptance and perhaps even gratitude. The convoy made its way to the waiting transport ship at the coast. I'd volunteered to accompany them as medical support for the first leg of their journey, so I followed in a separate vehicle. When we arrived at the harbor, I watched as the prisoners boarded the ship that would take them home. Ishida was one of the last to board. He paused at the gangplank, turning to take one final look at American soil. The morning sun caught his face, and I saw something there that brought tears to my eyes. Hope. This man, who had arrived so broken and filled with enemy propaganda, was leaving transformed. As the ship's horn sounded its departure, I stood at the dock with Sam, both of us watching in silence. The vessel slowly pulled away from the pier, carrying its passengers toward home and whatever future awaited them in post-war Japan. "He'll be all right," Sam said quietly, more to himself than to me. "He's got something now that no war can take away." I knew he was right. In all my years of nursing, I'd learned that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones we can bandage, and the most profound recoveries happen in the heart. Watching that ship grow smaller on the horizon, I said a silent prayer for Ishida and all the men aboard, hoping they would carry with them the seeds of peace we'd tried to plant. I held the letter from Japan in my trembling hands, tears welling up in my eyes as I read Ishida's careful English handwriting. The letter had arrived at Camp McCoy 3 months after his departure, forwarded to me by Sergeant Johnson. As I sat in the now quiet infirmary where I'd first treated Ishida, memories of those challenging days flooded back. "My dear friends at Camp McCoy," the letter began, "I have finally returned to my home in Kyushu." I could picture him there, describing how his family had waited at the port when his ship arrived. His elderly father, mother, and younger sister stood among the crowds of families awaiting their loved ones. Ishida wrote about the moment of reunion, IMC, how his mother wept upon seeing him, not just because he was alive, but because something in his eyes had changed. "They noticed immediately," he wrote. "My father said I carried myself differently. The hardness of war had been replaced by something else, what he called a quiet strength." I smiled, remembering how I'd watched that transformation myself. The suspicious, frightened man who'd first arrived at our camp had gradually opened his heart to understanding. Through my role as his nurse during his recovery from exhaustion and malnutrition, I'd witnessed his walls slowly crumbling. Ishida described his first weeks back home, helping his father tend their small vegetable garden. "I find peace in the simplest tasks now," he wrote. "Where once I saw only duty and obligation, I now see beauty in each moment." He shared how he'd begun teaching English to local children, using the words and phrases he'd learned from us at Camp McCoy. What touched me most was his description of a conversation with his sister. She'd asked him why he didn't seem angry or bitter about his captivity, like so many other returning soldiers. "I told her about Sergeant Johnson," he wrote, "about you, Nurse Harper, and about how kindness can bridge any divide." The letter went on to describe how he'd started speaking at local community meetings about his experiences. Despite initial resistance from some who still clung to wartime hatred, his message of reconciliation was beginning to take root. "Many young people especially," he wrote, "are hungry for a new way forward. They want to believe in a world where peace is possible." Reading his words, I remembered our last conversation in the infirmary, just before his departure. He'd asked me why I'd treated enemy soldiers with such care. I'd told him that healing knows no borders, that compassion is universal. Now, he was carrying that message forward in his own way. Towards the end of the letter, Ishida included a special message for Sergeant Johnson. I knew Sam would treasure these words. To Sergeant Johnson, who showed me that true strength lies not in hatred but in understanding. You changed not just my life, but the lives of all those I now teach. The lessons of peace and forgiveness you demonstrated through your actions will live on through generations. The letter concluded with, his hopes for the future. I dream of a day when our children will know each other not as enemies, but as friends. Perhaps one day, I will return to America not as a prisoner, but as a bridge builder between our nations. Until then, I carry the spirit of Camp McCoy, as Abercand, and the kindness I found there, in my heart. I carefully folded the letter, planning to share it with Sam during his next visit to the infirmary. Ishida's words were a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, light could shine through. IMT one human connection at a time. I stood at the back of the Veterans Hall, watching the extraordinary scene unfold before me. After all these years, seeing Takeshi Ishida and Sergeant Sam Johnson embrace brought tears to my eyes. As the camp nurse who had treated both men during those difficult days at Camp McCoy, I never imagined I'd witness their reunion at the 1,965 Veterans Memorial Gathering. The hall buzzed with conversation, but I focused on their corner table. Sam hadn't changed much, still carried himself with that quiet dignity, though his hair had grayed at the temples. Ishida looked different from the malnourished prisoner I'd first treated. He'd filled out, and his face showed peace instead of fear. You wouldn't believe how nervous I was about coming, I heard Ishida say as I approached with coffee for them both. His English had improved remarkably. But when I received your letter about the reunion... Miss Lillian. Sam stood up, pulling out a chair. Please, join us. We were just talking about those days. I settled in, placing their cups before them. I remember when you first arrived, Mr. Ishida. You could barely keep water down. Ishida nodded, his eyes distant. I was so frightened then. The propaganda had told us such terrible things about Americans. He turned to Sam. But you showed me different. That day when I collapsed in the laundry. Please stop. I can only take 3 inches in. Sam quoted, chuckling. I had no idea what you were trying to say. My English was terrible, Ishida admitted, smiling. But you didn't need words to show kindness. I watched as Sam's expression grew serious. You know, Ishida, I've thought about those days often. Being a black man in the service wasn't easy. Some of our own officers treated me worse than they treated the prisoner of wars. But helping you, showing that humanity could survive even in war, it gave me purpose. You changed me, Sam, Ishida said quietly. After the war, I became a teacher. I tell my students about you, about how one person's compassion can overcome years of hatred. The afternoon light filtered through the hall's windows, casting long shadows across their faces. I remembered treating Ishida's dehydration, watching Sam sit with him during recovery, seeing their unlikely friendship bloom despite the barriers of language and war. Remember Nurse Lillian bringing you extra water? Sam asked. She knew you were struggling but couldn't. Admit it. I felt my cheeks warm. I was just doing my job. No, Ishida shook his head. You both did more than your jobs. You showed me that the enemy I'd been taught to hate was human. That kindness could exist even in war. Sam reached across the table, gripping Ishida's hand. We all learned something in that camp. About dignity. About what matters most when everything else is stripped away. I watched their hands, one black, one Japanese, clasped across the table. All those years ago, I'd wondered if the seeds of humanity planted in those dark days would survive. Now, I had my answer. After you left, Sam continued, I kept thinking about what you said about your family's shrine back home. About honor and duty. Made me realize we're not so different after all. Ishida nodded, emotion making his voice rough. My children know your name, Sam. They know that sometimes the greatest lessons come from those we're taught to fear. I hope you like this story. Please share what's next, your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.